Hey friends, welcome to Child Life On Call. My name is Katie Taylor. I am a mom and I'm a child life specialist. If you're listening to the podcast today for the first time, welcome, and we want you to know that the conversations we have here are designed for parents whose child has received a medical diagnosis. I know it may feel extremely terrifying and world-changing even, but you're here now, and you're about to hear from another parent who has had the same feelings that you do right now, and they're still standing. They had the courage to come here and share what it was like for them, to hopefully make it a little bit easier for you. I'm so grateful to each and every guest and each and every listener who shows up here, and it's my privilege to host this sacred space. Imagine being told that your child has a rare disease, but there are no clear answers and no proven treatments. Only the hope that science will eventually catch up one day. That's the reality that many families face, including today's incredible guests, Maria and Matt Granados. In this episode, Maria, Matt, and I dive into their journey as parents of a child with a rare condition, Pyroxd D1, that's Pyroxd D1, how they turned their fight into finding answers into actually a mission to help others. From navigating a very complex diagnosis, which they are so incredibly honest about, that dynamic between themselves as a married couple, to becoming the incredible founders of the Take Part Foundation. They are truly paving the way for rare disease resources and advocacy. And there's nothing that's going to get past Maria and Matt. And I think you'll hear that in their voices today. As we go through our conversation, you're going to hear us talk about not just the emotional roller coaster, but the medical roller coaster of having a child with a rare diagnosis. We're going to talk about communication gaps that almost led to a life-threatening mistake and how they turned their personal struggle into their completely new mission with Take Part. I'm so grateful that you're here today. Let's dive into the episode. I'm so happy to have y'all on the podcast. I would love if you could just, introduce yourselves. Tell us a little bit about you, your family, what brought y'all together, your story, and thank you so much for being here.
Well, we're happy to be here. I'm Maria, and this is Matt Granados. We have been married for I think 9 years, going on 10 years. We're from all over the place. That's why it's hard to kind of nail us down. But we met and we lived in Atlanta for a while. We moved back to St. Louis in 2019. That's where we currently live, outside of St. Louis, Missouri. That's where I'm from, born and raised St. Louis girl. We have 3 kids. Our oldest, Natalie, has a rare condition called Pyrox D1, which I'm sure we'll talk more about, so I'll just breeze through that. She'll be 8 soon. We have a 6-year-old son as well, and we have a going on 2-year-old son as well. And who knows what else is coming along the pipe, but we're excited for that.
I like that answer.
Right. As entrepreneurs, we are grateful for that call that we had in our life, because also as parents of a kid with a rare condition, we did not realize how much flexibility we would need in our lives. And so we own our own consulting and team training organization. We have for several years. We also run a nonprofit, Take Part Foundation, which we will also talk about, I'm sure. We got put in our lap as our story unfolded, and we wanted to find ways to help other families too. So entrepreneurial family of 3 and who knows what else, and just trying to be more of an advocate, not only for our daughter, but anyone else we can be. Matt, you want to throw any golden nuggets in there?
We love what you guys are doing. Anyone who's helping this community that seems like it's siloed, but it's huge. And that's part of what got us to start Take Part was the tagline that we use is rare is more common than you think. Is there's so many of us who are just in this fight and we think we're by ourselves because we're called rare, but it's not as rare as we think.
That actually gives me chill bumps when you say that, because you're, especially when you're isolated at the beginning of a journey and you just feel like no one in my community that I know has even ever heard these group of letters put together, much less my child is now living with this, and it can feel so heavy. And it's one of my favorite parts about the podcast. Podcasts are just such an easy way to feel connected to others, but you don't have to give a whole lot. And, as caregivers and parents, you're constantly giving so much, but sometimes a podcast feels like, okay, I'm getting, I don't have to give a whole lot during this.
That's good.
Well, tell us a little bit, I guess, kind of the beginning of the story with Natalie. You've been married for almost 9 years. She's 8. You guys are at the beginning of your marriage. So excited about your first child, I'm sure. Kind of walk us through those moments.
You want me to start? I mean, you'd be better at telling that than me.
I'll start and he's going to jump in. We could talk over each other all day long. We're both, unfortunately, like type A talkers. So here we go.
Well, you guys are adorable. And if you're only listening to this podcast, you need to go watch it on YouTube too, because you're going to see how cute Maria and Matt are. I love it.
Oh, you're so sweet. Well, so yeah, Natalie is our firstborn. So we, pregnancy was pregnancy. I actually had just miscarried right before her. So I was kind of in a little bit of a fragile state of mind, my first kid. I didn't know how common miscarriage was either. So I was already in that state of mind. So very cautious and conscious about my pregnancy with Natalie. I got pregnant just a couple months after miscarrying, because we got pregnant right after we got married, and we were very blessed in that regard. I know how difficult it can be to get pregnant. And so we felt, extremely blessed, but also was walking this very fragile thing. Within the first, I think about 16 weeks into my pregnancy with Natalie, I had a severe hemorrhaging, and I was actually on an airplane when it happened.
Oh my gosh.
I thought I was miscarrying because I had actually bled way more severely with this than I did when I miscarried. And so was very convinced that was the case. My doctor said, get back on the plane and come right back home if I felt comfortable. So I did that and realized pretty much everything was hanging on by a thread, lack of better scientific terms. And so I rested and got healthy. And within a matter of 4 or 5 weeks, actually everything was healed. And they were like, we don't really know how else to tell you this, but you're good to go back to whatever else you want to do. Everything looks intact. And so that was a blessing. And then I kind of put that to the side. That actually has nothing to do with what she has going on, because what she has is genetic. And so, but I think it was just my way, or, maybe just God's way of just getting my heart prepared for just things that are different, and being okay to work through some of those things, and not being afraid to share our story, the hard parts of our story, so that other people could feel comfort, light, joy, all those sorts of things that they need to feel in their own struggles too. So kind of wet the palate for that. And then we had the rest of the pregnancy super normal. They weren't really concerned. Now looking back after having 2 other pregnancies, I know what kicks feel like now. That's all I knew. So I could feel her kicks, but he never really could. And we didn't really ever think anything of that. Right. So
because you don't have any previous experience to build on, or Yeah.
The doctors would ask me, do you feel her kicking? I'm like, I feel her kicking all the time, and you can see her move it and I had no frame of reference for that. And so also when she was born, our mothers, both awesome grandmas, did have a lot of concern on hey, she should be a little bit more sturdy than this when and so we went to our doctors, no, big floppy baby, this happens to a lot of people, don't even worry. We were told don't even worry for about a year.
Wow.
As we were worrying. And again, our first, so we're he's some kids don't walk till they're 2. Some kids don't. And so Natalie, basically her physical situation ended, if you will, on growing when she was about 6 months old. She was able to not sit herself up, but she could sit sturdy and not fall over. But it kind of all stopped there. And I will let you kind of pick up with the rest of that story if you want.
Okay. So I think the biggest thing, and listen to some of your other episodes that are on here, is it's so easy to get sucked into this kind of woe is me mentality when you start realizing this. So as you have listeners and people on here who are encouraging others, I'm amazed at how much our experience with Natalie has actually blessed our life and has actually enhanced our life. And it's not something that's talked about very often. And part of it was when you deal with the level of adversity that we get to deal with on a regular basis with her fights against everything that the world throws at her. But also as we started getting the news, it was we had to come together as one and actually make it through it. And I joke about it. We do really well in chaos, but if we were a dishwasher, we get at each other. So it's that element of the big things you tend to come together because you have no option. And what that's done is allowed 2 control freaks to realize we're completely out of control.
Right.
We cannot do this. So we were in the hospital because as Nat kind of grew and developed, one time she got a cold. And then when she got a cold, she just couldn't kick it. So we went to the hospital, and
she was about 2 at this time.
Right. So we went to the hospital, and it was Thanksgiving morning. And Thanksgiving morning, we were up in Philadelphia, where I'm originally from. And we had no diagnosis, no real understanding on what it is that she had going on. And we get to the hospital Thanksgiving morning, and they look at her. They take her right back. They let us realize this is a bigger emergency than we thought. One thing led to another. Her oxygen levels were down in the 60s, and she still kind of is looking white, but functioning somehow, which is a blessing. They get her on a helicopter and they say, hey, you're getting on a chopper to the next major hospital, which was the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. So Thanksgiving morning, before anything gets started, Maria gets into a car, I get into a helicopter, and it's the windiest day I've ever experienced in my life.
Yeah.
So we're flying about a 40-minute helicopter ride, and we finally get to Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. And they look at me and they say, hey, what's wrong with her? Like, what's she got going on? And I just got out of a helicopter. My daughter is laying there lifeless, breathing tubes in her throat. Like, I can't even articulate what's going on.
Right.
And I looked at the doctor and I said, look, I don't know, man, go to this website. And it was a website that we created with all of Natalie's medical records, all of her, since she was basically born, like Maria described, all the way up to about 2 years old. And I said, go look at that website and then come back if you have any questions, but I don't have any other answers on that. You got something?
Because at this point, she was like a medical mystery. And so, like,
Yeah.
we were obsessed with that show. Remember that Netflix show? It was like right in the heat of all of this. Undiagnosed, diagnosed.
Yes,
like
I know exactly what you're talking about. I haven't thought about that show in a while.
What if we just ask every doctor for all her paperwork and we just like, we can publish it ourselves? That's not like HIPAA. Like, you're as the parent, if you own that, like, you could do that. And so we're like, what if we just like, you know, and to Matt's point, like, everybody's at Thanksgiving dinner with their smart doctor uncle or their like aunt or whoever's in the medical field. And like, what if they're just having conversation? Hey, our friends have this kid. Like, they pull up the website. Like, what if somebody like is like, wait, I've seen a kid like that before. Like, you know, at this point we have done genetic testing inconclusive at this point so far, things like that. And so there's just a lot going on in that part of it all. And we had one little hiccup before that where she had gotten sick and gone to the hospital, but not like this. And so that's kind of where Matt was at when the doctor was like, hey, like, what do you guys know? We're just like, at this point, we just know all these things about her, but we don't know what any of it means.
It's like, I love your perspective about like when you feel helpless because you can't find an answer, there's always something that you can do. And it sounds like because of y'all's attitude and like, okay, well, we're just going to collect everything and we're going to put it here and we're going to talk to everybody about it. And that works. I was just recording a podcast last week and the mom said, she said, can you please just take this to grand rounds, take her case to grand rounds, get as many ears as you can to listen. Wow. There happened to be one person who understood. So you're exactly right. It is putting it all together, putting it out there when you don't have answers yourself and just talking to everybody you can.
And what we learned in this was that we own her medical records. The hospitals don't, but the hospitals can't share it the way we wanted to be able to share it because
amongst
of
each
HIPAA.
other. Yeah.
So when I started asking for all of this to compile it, I mean, it cost you to pay per sheet. I mean, it was such a difficult thing to do. And I was just doing it because, again, we wanted to see, is anyone having Thanksgiving dinner with Aunt and Uncle Doctor?
Yeah.
So when we brought it to the doctor and I gave him the website, I said, go check this out. And, that's going to give you whatever answer you're looking for. He literally comes walking back in with tears in his eyes. And I sat there and I was like, man, like, terrible bedside manner. You're the doctor here. I should be the one with tears in my eyes. What's going on? And he looks at me and he says, where did you get that website? And I explained to him what Maria just explained and explained what we did and why we built it. And I asked him why. And he said, because I was about to give your daughter a medicine that would have, at the very best, put her in a coma, but likely killed her. What? He said, but because I was able to go back and see how she was born and the doctor's notes on everything that happened, I realized there was some type of unknown neuromuscular condition that should not use this specific drug that I would have never known. So now I'm wondering why he's getting teary-eyed, because we should be excited. And I look at him, I said, well, why are we not celebrating? That's great. And he looked at me and he said, I would have saved more kids this week. And I said, what do you mean? Gosh. He says, parents don't know how to articulate what's going on, especially in a rare case like this. He said, but doctors, they talk in their notes in ways that we can understand. So that was our first realization of like, wait a minute, why is this so difficult? This shouldn't be that difficult for doctors and medicine to communicate the way that it has been almost impossible. So I'll never forget, that was the first time. That was in Thanksgiving in 2019. And I remember I called Maria up and I said, we need to like offer this to other families. The problem is it costs money to do it. And I said, and I don't feel comfortable coming to you and saying, hey, I know you have a kid with a rare condition. for $50 a month, we can host your
Give me
information,
all the
right? So
right.
I just said, hey, that would be great if we could do it, but it's helpful for us. And that was kind of the start of us going, hey, there's some gaps in this journey that common sense and logic and some business acumen could bridge and fix. So that was kind of the start of Natalie's first major emergency, and realizing that we as parents can actually help with the process, and we're not a burden. It's just the way the communication was happening was not effective.
It's like, shout out to, because of Natalie's existence and because of her parents, you guys are paving the way. Oh, it's going to make me teary.
Oh.
You're changing the game for so many other families. And that's because of Natalie. Like, what a gift she is. And I also want to go back to that doctor, because it's like, when you first told me, Matt, and you said that, he said, what's wrong with her? I was like, oh, I want to punch him in the face. I immediately want to punch this doctor in the face.
Yeah.
But then he comes back and he shows a little bit of vulnerability, and the ego goes away, and you're like, oh, that's actually a good doctor. I like that. And so sometimes you have to remember, we're also humans dealing with humans, and they're not going to get it right all the time. And it's like, when you both peel back the layers, you can really have this beautiful moment of like recognition of what can happen.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful, because I think it reminds us, like you said, he's a doctor in an emergent situation trying to save a kid's life. And so his words are going to be as direct as needed. And thankfully, and we're, he's a Philly boy, so he's direct.
I hear it coming out a little bit.
We're a lot less direct.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's one of those things where you until you're in it, you don't realize it. And I just think it helps humanize. I think a lot of times there's a lot of talk about the doctors need to humanize the parents more. And I think as vice versa too, we as parents need to humanize the medical team. I hate to, I don't want to put that burden on us, right, necessarily, because we're going through a lot. But at the same time, man, I've seen there's just so much. The way the nurses are with their kids in the hospital, the way the doctors are trying their best, but lots of them are just socially awkward. And that's just their personality, you know? And so trying to expect the most from them socially when so
I think you're right.
It's for them too.
It's harder maybe in the short term to wrap your mind around giving grace to someone who should be taking care of your child. But in the long run, you seeing them as a human is only going to help your relationship with them, which helps your child. So it's if you can get past that initial barrier, and it's so true. The caregiver burden is so high, and it's we're asking you to do another thing, which seems impossible, but it does make a big difference. And then those are the relationships, and that's the doctor that keeps following your case and checking back in and doing maybe one more step.
Right. It makes the short-term burden might feel heavy, but the long-term load is lifted when you can get these other people on board with your family to love them in a way that, and they see that they can be honest with you. It kind of lightens their personality too.
Totally.
And then it makes it better for everybody. I mean, we've gotten it wrong and we've gotten it right. I can promise you that. We've been in the hospital too many times to get it right every time.
The best advice I've gotten was, if Natalie's not offended, I don't need to be offended.
Sure.
Oh.
So we were doing an exercise like us weird family does of our core values for the year and our strengths and our weaknesses. And Natalie's weakness was, she said, I can't walk. That's a weakness of hers, right? But if someone was to point that out about her right away, I'd be all over it. And that concept of, if our kids aren't offended, we're taking it personally, and that's not how we're to lead our kids. And I don't want her offended. I don't mind. Look, there's something different about her, that she is disabled. That these are not sometimes there's people in this community who take these words and they're like, well, don't ever label them this way. And I'm okay if that's how you feel.
Right.
Yeah.
But if my kid is okay, if you ask Natalie, she would tell you she's special. Yeah. She can see that there's no one else in a wheelchair around her. So it's that element of, if my kid's not offended, I'm not offended. Now, if you offend my kid and she's bothered,
that we're talking, then Philly boy comes out.
But I found that they're a great, great check.
They help us check our hearts.
Exactly. That, am I bothered because you offended me, and am I ashamed of who they are?
Oh, I will never.
Are they actually offended? And if they are, then we're going to have a conversation.
I will never forget this story that happened last year. She's in second grade now, in first grade last year. Oh, it's going to get me emotional, maybe. I'm going to say it. She comes rolling in the back. We have a wheelchair van. She was rolling in the back. I was like, how are you today? She's like, she wasn't crying. And she will, because she's an easy crier. If she's sad, she will. She's like, I said, what's up? She's like, well, there was these 2 5th grade boys who were like talking about me and pointing and laughing, she said. And then instantly my insides started to just, because I was like, I knew this would eventually happen in school. I knew it would eventually happen. So I was like, here's that moment. Like, here, do you have all your parenting advice, right? Everything you thought you'd say when this happened. And then she kept going and she goes, but Mom, there was this 4th grade girl who literally got in the middle of them and stopped them and said, that's not very nice. And she was super cool. And I just thought, that's her version of the story.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And so I opened my email when I got home to write to the school. And I'm like, man, normally I'd want to write, there's 2 5th grade punks who need to get themselves checked. I don't know who they are, but I bet you could figure it out. However, I was like, you know what? I said, I told them like logistically what happened. Here's a story. I said, I just want you guys to know that you guys, there's a 4th grade girl in that school who is standing up for what is good. And someone needs to give this girl some accolades because like she did not have to do that. Natalie was like, she said it was out of the corner of Natalie's eye. So like, I don't even know if the girl saw that Natalie even saw it happening.
Yeah.
I said like I just said more of that, period. More of girls like that. Like, how do we make more students like that? That's really cool. I go, because we're not going to be able to stop our kids from getting comments at them all the time. But if we can teach other kids how to step up and soften those kids' hearts to like be the one that's like, how, more kids that are advocates for other kids too. So that was just like an emotional story that like I love it. So and I'm trying to tear it up, but I like
it's the framing that she sees in you all that she was able to do for herself. So like that's a mirror image, I feel like, of like the gifts that you give her too. Like it's so easy for me to see because you're telling me the story. I'm like, well, this is who you are. Like there's adversity, but there's also blessings. And like that's the story she told to you. It's really, y'all are amazing parents.
Oh, that's sweet. That's not always the case.
Not always.
You know what though? That makes me think like, I think as parents, when we want to get offended, and there are times when we need to stand up, there are times when they need to see us boldly stay in front of somebody else, and they've seen us do that. Like there are times when things have gone wrong and people have been rude and but it's not screaming. It's not how unfair. It's like, hey, let me go approach this person. Maybe they don't know what they did.
Yeah.
Maybe they don't understand. Maybe they need to meet Natalie. Maybe they need to like, do you know what I'm saying?
Ooh,
like as opposed to my kids seeing me fly off the handle about like the injustice. It's like, how can they see us be bold about the injustice rather than angry about it? And not that we don't have the right to be angry. We do. But like how can we use it? How do we use that? Is it productive anger? Is it like, hey, that made me so upset that clearly there's something going on here. Let me go figure out how we can make this not the case anymore. I don't know. There's something there.
Yeah. I love it.
I'm just talking in circles.
No, girl, you're not. And I love it. And you're bold. And that's the lesson that you're teaching. And I love it.
Yeah.
Matt, I want to go back to this website and kind of your vision then for wanting to do it for other families and what came of that.
So that's going to bring us to why we even started Take Part, right? So the website was just, that'd be amazing. That would be great.
We kind of tabled that idea for a second.
Right, because I couldn't figure out from a business perspective. I understood I knew we could sell it. I knew it would be a desired product or a service, but I just didn't feel comfortable charging parents, right? Like that just sounded dirty to me. And I'm as capitalistic as it comes, right? So when I don't do something, that felt different. So we were sitting there in February of 20, right? So we're not far after that. And we finally take the chance of doing a full genome sequencing, paying out of pocket to do it and see if we can figure out what's going on with Nat. Because at this point, we have no insurance that covers what we need, right? Because it's an undiagnosed. There's no way to categorize her. And we get sat down, and she just happens to get sick in February, early February, if you all remember 2020. It got real crazy.
What happened back then? I don't.
Got real crazy right afterwards. So we were right before
that.
And we had a genetic appointment to share the results of the genetic test. So we were already in the hospital. So they're like, hey, let's just go have a conversation. So we walk into a side little consult room. It's Maria, myself, and there's 3 people from the hospital.
I'm like, there's 3.
I was like, that's strange, right? There's obviously something that's going to be shared.
Sure.
So they go through and they say, hey, your daughter has a very rare mutation. There's no name for it yet. It's on the Pyrox D1 gene. And that's all they said. So I looked at them and said, okay, that's nice. So what do we do about it, right? There's the problem. Now what's the solution? And they kind of all three look at each other and they kind of say, well, there's not really much you can do. And the way I heard it, whether they said this or not, was basically your daughter has to outlive science. Like, we're not there yet.
We don't know.
And I remember looking at Maria and we're just both like, that's not a reasonable response. Like,
we couldn't accept that.
I'm not okay with that. Appreciate your honesty, but you're wrong. Like, that's kind of where our head went. So we kind of had to go back to deal with Nat in the hospital because she obviously needed to be cared for and didn't have a ton of time to process it. And then eventually Maria just Googled to see if there was any groups out there. And it turns out there was a Facebook group of people who have this Pyrox D1. Wow. So Maria sends it over to me, and now I'm like a dog with a scent. Like, there's an option. We were told there's no option. Now there's an option.
There have been no traffic in this group for like years.
So I get on.
I'm like, oh, wow.
And we start stirring the pot, and I'm looking at it, and I see no one's talking about anything. There was one comment years ago of some doctor in Australia who was studying something about this. So I sent a bunch of messages, got no response. And then eventually I reached out to our neurologist, who we have a great relationship with. And I said, Doc, I need you to do me a favor. I said, I need you to send over an email, and in the subject line, write, I have a patient who will fund your research. I had no money at the time. I had no idea what we were going to do, but I wanted to get their attention to find out what was going on.
And we can find the money.
And I wasn't nervous about the money part. So we eventually get a hold of them, have a conversation, and we do a Zoom call similar to this. And I asked her, I said, well, what are you running into? Like, how can we help? And she's like, we don't want to burden you, which is, I think, a thing that many people think about parents in this position of we don't want to burden you. And I looked at her and I said, look, I'd rather fail and try than not try and fail. But either way, those outcomes are the only two outcomes I'm sitting with right now. So I was like, please use us, because otherwise we're sitting back just praying that she's going to outlive science.
And at this time, we have so many people in our lives who like love it. We both come from extremely large families. So like my parents are each one of 10 siblings. His parents are 5 and 6 siblings. Like we have aunts and uncles. We have cousins. I have 43 first cousins. We have friends. Everyone's like, how do we help Natalie? Like, what can we do? This is kind of where all that kind of culminates. Like so many people have been asking us how to help, and we had no way for them to help us. Like there really isn't anything anybody could have done or donated to, or like, there was nothing.
Yeah, or nor did we have any idea that there was something we could do, right? There was no path at all. So eventually I'm talking with her, and this is where the path kind of opened up. I was like, what do you need? She's like, well, I don't want to ask. And I'm like, all right, well, we're getting somewhere. What do you want to eat? And she really didn't want to burn us. She's like, well, it's a money thing.
And now a word from our sponsor. We're so grateful to have Payne's Instant Topical Anesthetic Spray as our sponsor of today's podcast. Help control pediatric procedural pain associated with needle procedures and minor surgical procedures while improving patient satisfaction. Payne's Instant Topical Anesthetic Spray works immediately. It is a non-drug and non-flammable topical spray that can be used to temporarily relieve the pain associated with minor surgical procedures and needle procedures. Payne's is a medical device and does not contain medication. It can be a safe and effective alternative for lidocaine injections when used to temporarily control pain associated with immunizations, IV starts, blood draws, foreign body removals, and suturing or suture removal, to name a few. Payne's works on a 3-step process. First, prepare the site and equipment for the procedure per your facility's protocol. Second, apply Payne's by spraying about a can's distance away for 4 to 10 seconds or until the skin begins turning white. Finally, perform the procedure. The anesthetic effect of Payne's lasts about 1 minute and can be reapplied as many times as necessary. Refer to application instructions for full details. Important risk and safety information. Consult your pediatrician when using on children 4 years old and younger. Do not use on large areas of damaged skin, puncture wounds, animal bites, or serious wounds. Do not spray in eyes. Overspraying may cause frostbite. Freezing may alter skin pigmentation. Use caution when using product on persons with poor circulation. Apply only to intact oral mucous membranes. Do not use on genital mucous membranes. The thawing process may be painful, and freezing may lower resistance to infection and delay healing. If skin irritation develops, discontinue use. Caution: federal law restricts this device to sale by or on the order of a licensed healthcare practitioner. Studies suggest that pain ease does not induce vasoconstriction, does not contaminate a site that has been cleansed, and is preferred by patients and practitioners. Pain ease comes in 2 different spray pattern variations, medium stream and mist. It is also available in 2 sizes, 3.9 ounces or 1 ounce single patient. Gebauer appreciates the care and comfort that you provide to pediatric patients. Visit gebauer.com/pain ease with no space to learn how pain ease can make visits more comfortable.
We don't have enough funding to get this to the next level. I said, well, how far off are you? And she said around 20 or 30. And I'm sitting there going 20 or 30 million. Like, I can't, that's a much bigger number than I thought that we'd have to raise. And she said, no, not million, thousand. And I said, excuse me? I said, you're $20,000 away from stopping the only research that's happening with my daughter. Here's my Amex, like run it. I'll figure out the 26.2% forever, but like, don't give up for that little amount of money. And that really opened my eyes where I said, look, I said, how often does this happen? And she told me about this concept of Death Valley. I said, so there's a name for this? What's that? She's like, well, that's where all the great research goes and dies because it just runs out of funding. And it never gets enough legs to get funding from big pharma or from big organizations because it's just too small. It's not profitable. Like I said, I'm a capitalist at heart. I get that 100%. But where there's a gap in the capitalistic system, there's an opportunity as well. So as we started sitting back, I started thinking, man, like how many times is this happening? How often is it? So I reached out to a mentor of mine, and it was one of those conversations which was, hey, I just kind of want some guidance, but also I know you know rich people, so I think you could help raise some money. And what was needed at the time was about $250,000 over a 2-year period to get them to publish proof that they could then go and get bigger funding to do more testing or anything like that. And in that conversation, he looked at me and he said, Matt, he said, how common is rare? And that's where I sat back and I was like, well, Natalie's the 17th ever. So like
with hers,
that's pretty rare. He's like, no, how many people have a rare disease? And that's when these 3 statistics came up as I'm because now I'm trying to like talk him into helping us fund this thing. And I'm like, well, there's, 30 million people in the United States with a rare condition. And I'm like, but that can't be right. That's 10%. No, that's right. It's 10%. It's more common than you think. And then the next stat that we saw was that 95% of those people will not have an FDA approved treatment option. And then I saw that 35% of them won't make it past the age of 5. At this point, that's about 4. And that's when I looked at Maria and said, hey, I think we need to start a foundation. And Maria, who's been in the nonprofit world.
That's my professional background.
What was your answer?
I said, absolutely not. They'll fund it and we'll just raise the money.
And that's where Take Part started, was how do we help fund these small projects? I call them dungeon doctors, right? The doctors who have all the great ideas, but they're stuck in their office and they take their budget, they cut their salary by 20, 40 grand, and they use that money to fund the best they can to try to get something that's provable to then take to get published. So we set up projects, is what we call it, where we set up a business plan with them on how are they going to take this money they need, and in $20,000 to $25,000 tranches, we release it to them as they're progressing through their research. So they never have to worry about money. They can just focus on what they're doing, but they don't get the next step until they hit the last benchmark. So it's not just this, here's all your money. But if we were an angel investor,
we took a business,
investing into a startup with getting a minimal viable product, if these words make sense to anybody, then they can go to like a VC, a venture capitalist, and get a big
pharma
investment to then take it and run it to scale. So we started it and that was the first thing Take Part started doing was project-based research. And from there, I remember I looked at Maria and I was like, but remember that website? Can we tie that in now? And now we had a foundation, but now we don't have to charge people. So now people can go on our website, upload and do everything that we offered. I said we did with that other website on our Warrior page and have all their medical information, easy to share, easy to give, and easy to actually tell their kid's story one way or the other.
And that's what we do now. We do research, resources, and storytelling. And storytelling is the Warrior pages. And like teaser, they're completely getting revamped because we did raise with the money we needed to, and we're going to have a newer, robust system that will probably roll out in spring. It's being worked on right now, so that families can really just utilize this as their subjective and objective way to tell their kid's story. What videos, what pictures? Do I have a new teacher, a new babysitter that needs to see this, a new doctor, like family and friends? And then if they do want to fundraise for a certain thing, we can have a button on there. We're working on those things as well. Like those are the future. That's like the future of that aspect of it.
I want to finish one other thing with the Warrior page, because some people listening on here would benefit from this, or
For sure.
in their community.
We do have a version now.
Yeah, so go online. It's free. And what Maria was talking about was, yes, we've used it in the medical world, but Natalie gets new teachers every year, and they don't know her story. So we are able to articulate it in a way that doesn't scare them. And when you are informed, you're more comfortable. Not only that, but my comfort level to go speak to some of the highest, most well-renowned doctors is so much higher because I know my daughter's story and I can articulate it and give information. So now one of the things we hear from doctors all the time is they want their parents to be involved in the treatment. They want their parent, but they need their parents to know their part, right? Like, and the fact that we can come and share the anecdotal proof of what we've seen happen,
right?
And in a way, and then say, here's what the other doctors have put. It's given us a tool to even the playing field.
Yeah.
So if I go into an ER, I'm not intimidated. I respect the doctors. I recognize I'm not a doctor, but I'm not intimidated by a doctor. So if a doctor says something that puts me in my place, I have all the medical backing about my daughter to be able to have a conversation a little bit more intelligently. And I found with the warriors and the families that do it, that's one of the tools they use is they just feel more comfortable telling their kid's story and confident.
Helps grandma tell a story to her friends. It helps. It helps a lot of your people that love this child to be like, hey, this is, because we all get asked what's wrong with your kid, what's going on with your kid, like, right? And then this gives it another way to kind of have that. I mean, I know that there's sites like Caring Bridge and other things too, but our point was to make this very medical specific. So you could upload medical files at your own discretion. So for those people that want to be able to share more of that, in case somebody out there, especially if they don't have a diagnosis, in case somebody out there has answers for them.
And then the other part of it is once your kid turns 18, and you don't have access to those medical records,
that's so true.
Especially if your kid's non-communicative,
you've now gathered
you have no access to it. You can't get access to it. So it gives the parents a chance to get it while they're young, while they still can. And because you own it, HIPAA doesn't apply to how I want to share my information. What HIPAA is how others share my information. So because of that, I can send it to you or a doctor over in Germany. I can expand however I want. And other doctors can send people to our website without sending them information. Does that make sense? So it totally opens the world of access to information that we really need.
And our doctors actually really love that idea. I think that sometimes people think maybe doctors wouldn't love that. Like all of ours have been like, that's a great idea.
Yeah. The doctor who doesn't, it may be time to find a new doctor.
Right. Because they understand like the collaboration that's needed on some of these rare and undiagnosed cases is just, it's a lot. What either of us didn't elaborate on yet is a second huge part of what we do. So we do research, and right now we're on our second project. So that's exciting. And we just started funding that. So because we're so new, we wanted to fully fund the first one, make sure how much money could we raise. We didn't know each year. Make sure we followed through with our commitment. We're starting another one as well, and we'll be looking for more. And with the new website launching sometime in the spring, we'll have a form on there for people to submit research proposals as well. So our goal is to continue to do that. The second thing we realized is when we were going through our genetic testing situation, we thankfully could pay out of pocket for that at the time. Now we pushed it away, and we have a whole video resource about this that kind of educates people on it, but it's like, no one really pushed us to get it done. It was kind of like, and we're like, insurance doesn't cover it. We're not going to pay the 10 grand. Like, that's fine. I wish somebody would have educated me more on why that would have been helpful to pay for if I could.
Yeah.
And so what I realized in the process was we work with St. Louis Children's Hospital. They're incredible. That's where we live, and that's where we go for everything. We were talking on some of the statistics of stuff, just like, hey, how many people come to get tested, but did not, when they get denied by their insurance, so then they don't follow through with it. Okay, so from that population, how many don't follow through because they can't afford it? Right. And the numbers were high. We're talking 100 to 120 families a year just at our hospital, probably is like the estimate. They hadn't tracked it yet. We were making educated guesses together based on that. And so now we're tracking that information at St. Louis Children's through Take Part Foundation. And we are actually funding that as the final like chance for families who get denied and can't afford it. We are that bucket that they pull from as far as that goes, because what do we know as medical moms, right? The diagnosis might not give you everything you were hoping for, but what it does do from an insurance perspective, most of the time, I'm not going to ever promise anything, is that now because they can label your child a certain way, it's it's easier now to get access to the therapies, the resources, the things you might actually need. All of a sudden we have a G button. All of a sudden we have the Rolls Royce of wheelchairs. All of a sudden, like she said, OT, PT, speech, music therapy, like all this stuff. And I'm like, wow, this would have all been so helpful. And we aren't struggling financially, but I can guarantee you, if had we had to pay for all those things, we would be out of money.
You would be.
So like, I don't care who you are and where you fall financially. Like this stuff is so helpful. Getting a diagnosis is so helpful. And also it helps tell the story of your child, who might then be able to tell the story for other kids that are coming up under them, and help families get access to things faster and save more lives that way too. There's a world of possibility when it comes to getting a testing diagnosis, even if there's no cure for that yet, because there is just so much more that can be possible for your child as far as what they have access to from an insurance perspective. So take part. That's a huge part of what we do. We fund research, we fund resources, those resources being genetic resources mostly right now, in addition to a couple other things we do, and then storytelling. And so that's just kind of how we've felt we can contribute to the rare community. And there's so many great organizations doing so many different things. And that's why I love, like, none of us have to do all of it, but like if we can do some of it, that's where the good stuff is.
And trying to tackle all of it, it doesn't get you anywhere. It just keeps you like further and further into the hole. So like the specific question you asked to your hospital that you have a relationship with, how can I make an impact for these 120 families in my community? That is huge. And then if it works, you can replicate it. So it's so easy to get overwhelmed by like, this doesn't exist, but I want to try to make it, but try to start really small. I think that's good advice.
And then the other thing we found was everyone kind of does their own siloed thing. And I sat there, I was like, that's not going to help us kind of move the needle. It's going to keep us stuck there. And then parents do it, and, you know, their kid, either there's a cure or they lose their kid, something happens that changes, and then that whole foundation sinks. So one thing that we've reached out to is if there's anyone out there who's trying to do this on their own, like, we would love to hear about what you're doing and seeing, can we help fund that as a project? Right. Like, or if you want to bring it, and you need that umbrella. Starting a 501c3 is not fun. Keeping one is even less fun, right? So starting it's hard, keeping it is even harder. So a lot of parents kind of stay away from it, but we would love to help anyone. If you're listening to this, you're like, hey, I think I could benefit from this. Even if it wasn't something we talked about, just go on our website. We are getting a new one, but the current one does work. So you can go on, you can apply for a project. You can ask any questions you want. You can see our warriors. You can see the projects we're working on, all of those things. And we just want to bring that community together so that there's more powers in the number.
Wow, you guys are so impressive.
Take-part.org and be patient with us. We are an entirely volunteer team of people. We do our best, but I am working on it all the time. So you'll probably talk to me if you talk to somebody. And we're growing pretty quickly. We had our first gala last year, and I didn't realize how impactful that would be as far as finances go. So we were able to do a lot more. We were able to bless some veteran families who have kids with rare conditions, because as we know, veterans insurance, that's also a whole thing. So like if they have a rare kid, that's probably even more difficult. And so we were able to do that. We were able to send some family or pay for some scholarships for some camps that help disabled families. And so a lot of our rare community people are disabled. And so just different things too. And we're always open to ideas on how to help families thrive. Our three big buckets, like we said, are research, resources, and storytelling, of course. But if we can help, we would love to. And we also know a lot of other great organizations that help in other capacities. So if it's not us, maybe we know a way to connect you with somebody else who's doing something. Like I always say, like, I might have to give somebody a no, but my hope is that I can give them a contact in the process. So like, hey, maybe this person, maybe that falls into their scope of what they're doing and they can help you. That's why we need all of us doing whatever we're called to do.
And I think as we, you know, God's put this in our life to do it for a specific reason. There's no question about that. Whether we want to or not, that's inevitable, right? But the conversation, especially from parents and you know, the issue and the strain it puts on marriages, same concept that, hey, this doesn't have to be, you know, a diagnosis is not a death sentence, right? Like it doesn't have to kill the marriage. If you are we are both.
It's not a relational death sentence.
Correct.
Sure.
We are both very go-getter personalities. And I find that a lot of people, when they hear this diagnosis, if they have that kind of type A personality, they take the focus and they put it towards either the work or something outside of what's happening. And What we've had to do, which again is a blessing because it's not how we normally would have done it, is we had to take that focus and turn it towards each other and actually work together. It was not an option. We didn't have the option of sitting back and relaxing. And I think that's the only thing I would encourage other couples out there. There's terrible statistics on what happens with couples, but that is because we take that emotion and we push it out versus bringing it together and working together to work through this. And we'd be happy to help any way we can.
I'm motivated by the single mom every day when it comes to what we do, because I just think like together, this is hard. I have one friend who has 5 adopted children who have special needs, all of them. I just think like the tenacity and the boldness and the obstacles we can cut out of the way, insurance wise, financial, like just keep cutting for people, because I mean, it's hard enough with 2.
Yeah.
I can't imagine doing it solo. And I want to make a way for those people too.
Absolutely. Well, at the beginning, Matt, you talked about kind of this misconception of getting a diagnosis and that it's difficult, but what you really see are the blessings. And one of my favorite questions to ask at the end of my podcast episodes is asking, what have you learned about yourself since becoming Natalie's parents? But because you brought up the marriage and relational thing, I'm going to have you guys, I want to ask you to point it out in the other one. So like Maria, what have you learned about Matt since he became Natalie's dad?
I have learned that, like me, Matt does like to have control. And the hard part is that he's learning that in certain parts of his life, control looks different. And it's more about how can I, from a heartfelt place, do what's best for my family and release the control and instead move forward in the ways that I can. And I think what I've seen him do, because he's an entrepreneur, he's only worked for himself since he was 16 years old, right? So like he's used to just doing it and getting his way and moving forward. And in this world, that can't always be the case, but I've watched his heart transform, not just for his own kid, but for other kids. And I think had we not had this stop sign in our life that made us pause, we may have just bulldozed through. And so I'm just grateful to see that, like, he, in his stopping and taking a breath, he's been able to do what's best for Natalie, and in turn, other kids are getting to be blessed by that. So that's, I don't know if I answered the question right. But
that's why
that was all good.
I would say the biggest change for both of us is just our reliance on God. Like that's literally been the thing that I would never have expected. The amount that we
never would have expected
to
that.
lean, which is we all do as broken people, but our egos get in the way and we think we can do it. We can't do it. We know that very clear. The thing about Maria that I would say has changed most is her limit of what she's able to handle. Like, could you handle a sick kid? Could you handle talking to an ER doctor while your kid's on, breathing tubes? Could you handle dealing with all that and then loving your other 2 kids and not forgetting about them? And for her to be able to care for Nat, take care of our family, take care of me the way that a wife and a mom should, that's something that's on a whole nother level that you see in these crazy moments. The biggest realization that I have with her is just the way she processes things is different than me. So people would always say we have the same process whenever we have an emergency. I go with the ambulance and Maria follows. And the conversations we always get is, man, Matt, how are you so emotionally stable in all this? And the biggest thing that I've seen her grow and what she's opened my eyes to is I'm not emotionally stable. I'm emotionally suppressed. She's emotionally stable. She gets crazy, deals with it, and still shows up at the hospital. I just don't deal with it. There's nothing impressive about what I do. But what she does, and many moms that I've seen do this,
cry it out right away.
they're in tears on the way too, and in the ER, and they're still functioning. So her ability to continue to function while experiencing the emotional roller coaster that is what we deal with is something that I've never had to deal with, and she does it better than I ever could.
Wow. I know you guys are really busy. I think you should start a marriage podcast. It's just an idea. Because gosh, it takes, you guys are awesome. And thank you, Matt, for being vulnerable and saying that, because I think we see that a lot in dads who just haven't been taught how to ride the emotional wave and how to get through it. To see it in yourself and see the fruits that come from your wife are amazing. Well, thank you all so much. I wish we could continue talking. I feel like we should come back. I want to do an update when the website's up, get more stories. And So are you guys on Instagram, social media? What's the best place for
Yeah.
people to
So
continue to keep up with how you're doing?
Sure. Take Part has an Instagram. I think that's probably a really good one, at Take Part Foundation on Instagram. We have a Facebook page as well, Take Part Foundation on Facebook. We have a YouTube channel for Take Part, which is probably linked on both those. And we have some really great video resources on there. We have a little mini documentary that was done really well on Natalie's life, like a day in her life, which we hope to do
we
more.
didn't talk about that.
Which we hope to do more videos on for other diseases with other kids as well as we grow in that way. And then we have some education resources on like why genetic testing is important, stuff like that. And then I'm pretty active on social media, on Instagram myself, and I think I'm tagged on all of our Take Part stuff too, so people could follow along if they just want to follow the mom life of somebody with a kid with rare disease. I'm pretty open about that stuff too, but yeah, that's where we're at.
Wonderful. Well, any other stories or questions or things that you were hoping to talk about and share with everybody today that I didn't ask you or you were hoping to bring up?
I mean, we have stories will go for a long time.
You know, I just think if we can encourage any other parents out there just to continue to put one foot in front of the other. The only reason we feel called to share anything is that like we hope that that's an encouragement for somebody else to say like somebody else is in it and they're waking up today and they're moving, you know, and like if we can be that, awesome, because other people have done that for us. We didn't just like show up overnight like this. We have people in our lives who we've clung to, who've walked this journey before us. And they're the reason why we feel like we could get up, and now we look back and bring somebody else up. So if you need to be encouraged to stand up today, stand up. And then tomorrow you'll probably be pulling somebody else up with you. And if we can just all keep doing that, I think we'll make it. And
then the other two things, if we come back and do a recap, is Maria's concept of let your fight shine. Oh yeah. And this time that Natalie, I always talk about that. The time that Natalie died and came back to life. Oh, which is in the documentary as well. Yeah, because that was a really wild time. A crazy 20 minutes pronounced dead. And leaving on the stretcher. But the realization and the growth that came of that situation is something that our family still celebrates. So it's not like hiding, like Nat knows what happened. It's happened 3 other times since then. You know, we've not to that extent, but separate times that we've had to revive her back. So we're on borrowed time, right? God has her here for a reason, and our job is just to shepherd that however we can, the best we can. And in a weird way, that's what "Let Your Fight Shine" is like. You know, the little quote, "Let your light shine." Which is so cool. I love that. But to me, it's like a lot of us don't feel like we have light, but we have fight. Yeah, you do. A lot of fight. But if we can utilize that fight, we can show up in it, maybe God will shine light through that. We know that like sometimes the weakest, most vulnerable parts of you are where somebody else sees beauty. And like if you just show up in that, then that's really where the sweet spot is. Cause like it came one day to me when Natalie was like in a bright pink wheelchair and she rolls into our church one Sunday and like everybody like stops and like runs to her and all this kind of stuff. And I'm just like, she can't hide her fight. But you know what we do as like functioning abled people? We try to suppress all the things that are not awesome about us. But yet there's these kids who everybody's drawn to and they're wearing their fight. And maybe if we could do more of sharing our fight, then that kind of light and attraction would be coming out of us as well. And so that's really where that all came from, is just like maybe God's light shining through you is only going to show up if you're okay being vulnerable with your weaknesses too.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the fight is so important. It's what keeps you going every single day. You're just amazing. Well, thank you so much, both of you, for being on the podcast with me. You guys, I have the best news. If you didn't hear it at the beginning of the episode, Support Spot, our app, is now available for every parent. You no longer need a hospital code to log in. So go ahead and go to childlifeoncall.com/supportspot and download our app today. Hospitals and child life specialists, yes, we are still partnering with you if you want to customize content or provide this app to your families free of charge. We're so grateful that you're here. When you rate and review this podcast, it helps other families be able to find us. So let's keep doing that, and I will see you again here next week. For those of you who are joining us today, I am not a doctor. I'm not a therapist. I am a child life specialist. And the suggestions and tips and resources that I talk about with parents on this podcast may be great for you, and they may not be right for you. So the most important person you can talk to about getting support is your care team, your doctor who knows your story and your child's story. So regardless of maybe what I mention or what other families mention here, we're not licensed therapists, we're not doctors. We're having a conversation about what the parenting journey has been like. So please keep that in mind as you listen today.